Welcome to Shorty's SuperCoach, and today we're going to take a look at the Sydney Football Club and everything they've got to offer our SuperCoach sides in 2017. Of course, the runners-up of last year, certainly a quality side, and they'll give us plenty of options to work with throughout next season. Now, if you haven't tuned into these previews so far, feel free to check out all the others. I've got all the other clubs basically, except for the Dogs and West Coast, which will follow very shortly, but we take a bit of a broad look. A few guys that should be on your radar, not necessarily obvious picks or drafties, those will come later as we really hone in on our absolute structures and pinpoint positions, and of course drafties and rookie picks really come into play as the pre-season games start rolling. It's hard to really identify them with any seriousness or any real clarity. It's a little bit of guesswork. So just guys that might be on the verge of breaking out, or fellas that might provoke a little bit of discussion within the team and provide a bit of debate, we like to take a bit of a look into that at this time of year. Now, of course, the Swans, arguably the best midfield in the competition, and they've got three players that are all around the same price in the likes of Josh Kennedy, Dan Hanbury, Luke Parker. So I thought it's a very tough sort of exercise to pinpoint which one to pick. Now, I have given a bit of a verdict on it, but I thought I would just throw some numbers at you just to highlight how even they are, but also how different of players they are, yet they all ironically will cost around 9k difference. So you know, they vary with their strengths, but all around they're fantastic players, and all in the top 20 players in the competition, perhaps top 12, and certainly guys that we'll be looking at. And of course, while it's difficult to all average around the 115 mark, even though they basically did or came quite close, and we've seen in the past the likes of Beams, Swan and Pendlebury, it is always tricky to try and pinpoint the absolute top mid of a team, especially when a side bats very deep. You know, it's hard to pick the best mid of great teams gone by. So sometimes if you can pinpoint the guy that does burst out and just edge clear ever so slightly, it can be very valuable. So I thought we'd take a look at their prices, averages, you know, some of their strong points, their statistics, and even break down some of their points of last season. So I think the easiest way to probably do it, I'll go through their price and averages together, and then I'll pinpoint the actual player profiles a little closer and do them individually. So JPK, you'll get him for 617,000. Hanbury, 616,800. Luke Parker, 608,900. So they all cost basically, you know, it's changed between the two, or the three of them. JPK averaged 113.4. Of course, Hanbury did likewise, hence there's only $300 difference between them. And Parker was just slightly down at 111.9. Now, I looked at JPK at first. Now, of course, he's the oldest of all three, 29 as next season rolls around. Unbelievable numbers. He's the actual definition of consistency, really. He and Pendlebury, it's hard to go past. 31.5 touches per game, 5.6 tackles, 7.6 clearances, 17 contested possessions. Now, numbers don't always tell the truth, but they cannot lie. He's an inside beast, has been for a long time, loves the hard ball, loves the clearance. He's the heart and soul of your inside mid, absolutely jet inside. And those statistics certainly highlight that. 2012 to 2016, his averages have ranged from 105.4 to really when he peaked, I think that was 2012, he averaged 120.2. But he certainly delivered some really good averages in between that, in the low 110s to 115. So we know what he's all about. He's durable, he ticks all the boxes, he's an outstanding player. The only concern would be that he is the oldest of them all, and the fact that a few younger mids might be coming into the picture in the Swans midfield, as I'll touch on throughout the podcast. But I couldn't go past him, to be honest. He's an outstanding player, consistent, ticks all the boxes. It's so hard to shut him down because he is such a jet on the inside. You can't tag that. He's a physical beast, and I would expect another fantastic season. I would probably be predicting his average to be pretty similar, maybe around that 110 to 112 mark. Looking at some of his numbers, he had 14 tons last season, went 10 times beyond 115, and under 90 just the once. That was a 75 in round 1, and he continued that form in the finals. 3 tons at an average of 114.3 across the 4 finals that the Swans played. So it's clear, I've said it, if you want consistency, if you want a guy that you can bank on for just your 110, then he's your man. He's a fantastic player. I couldn't see much of a drop-off happening just because he doesn't rely on speed. There's always rumours and few whispers that he might play a bit more forward, but you don't take your cream of the crop out of the absolute engine room. I couldn't see them doing that, so I would be banking on Kennedy to have another great year. Moving on to Hanbury, of course, 6'16", you'll have to pay for him. Averaged to 30.8 touches, 4.9 tackles, 4.7 clearances, 13 contested possessions. So again, a slightly different player to Kennedy, but once we do all 3 player profiles, I'll discuss them in a more, I guess, comparing sort of light. As for Dan Hanbury, he's also quite durable. 21 games since 2010 each year. We did have just 19 in 2014, but overall, very durable player. Of course, last year, averaged very nicely, backing up the 114.5 in 2015. And there is 2 main years. Of course, he's only 26 years old. Did take his time to really do that apprenticeship through the Swans midfield, but had some pretty good numbers prior to 2015, but it's only been the last couple of years that he's really exploded and been the absolute jet that he is, and he's certainly come along to be an outstanding player, one of the best mids in the comp. As for his breakdown of numbers last year, 17 tons, went above 115 11 times, went below 90 3 times with scores of 68, 76 and 86. In the finals, didn't have an unbelievable final series. It was pretty good. Had the 3 tons for an average of 96.5. Of course, he had that injury in the grand final where he only played 70% of game time, and of course that was the only one that he didn't ton up. Didn't have enormous tons, but he certainly had a pretty impressive final series. But he'd certainly be disappointed with the grand final result and the fact that he was unable to truly impact it with his body failing him with quite an awkward and sort of nasty little incident. But we'll move on to Luke Parker, who again is a bit of a different player and relies on other aspects to really get his points. 26.9 touches per game, 6.5 tackles, 6 clearances a game, 13.6 contested ball, so that's about your 50% ratio, contested uncontested. Again, he's durable. All these guys, very reliable bodies. Hanbury's probably the most suspect with shoulder and of course the knee, but above all, I mean, the stats don't lie. They have continually played great numbers year on year. Now, he's probably got the least runs on the board, Parker, in regards to absolute big time scoring. Last year was probably his only genuine premium kind of year. In 2014 he burst on the scene, averaged 108.5. If my memory serves me correct, I think he could be selected as a forward then. Dropped back to 99.7 in 2015. Of course, last year 111.9, really put himself on the map. Brownlow medal votes, he was one of the favourites, especially early on, and certainly has the ability to go big. So as far as his numbers break down, 16 tons last year, 115 plus, he went 10 times, and below, I should say, 90, he went 4. So 89, 75, 67 and 59. Only had the 1 ton in the final series for an average of 93.8. Consistent without being great. Had some very good games, certainly against the Cats and I think the Crows, but otherwise probably not. It wasn't the Swans' best player through the final series, but certainly a 93.8 average throughout 4 finals, where they only won the 2 of them, is fairly handy and was among the best for the Swans. So they're a trio of players that are very tough to split, as you can see, purely on their numbers. And I guess what I was saying with the difference in player that they are, but they all add up to fairly similar numbers as far as SuperCoach goes. Kennedy, inside ball winner, contested ball winner, dishes it out from the bottom of the pack. Then you go along to Hanbury, who of course, he's more your outside, can often start off a wing, work his way into the stoppage, and is very good at breaking away and kicking goals on his left and hitting up targets. Slightly more uncontested, but his 13 contested possessions per game is fantastic, but he's just ever so slightly more outside. Where Luke Parker doesn't get as much of the ball, but is no doubt the best of all of them in the air. Certainly capable of taking a big mark, and is more of a goal kicker than the other two as well. So I think it's very tough to split them. I mean, they all have their pros and cons. The only concerns I would really say is I feel like Parker has the least runs on the board. I know he can go very big, and I guess it was shown in his little breakdown. He went big 16 times with 1600s, 3 times over 150, but also out of the 3 had the most games under 90, and also had the lowest score of 59 and 67, so the 2 lowest scores. So I guess his range of scoring is a bit bigger than the others. So for mine, of the 3, Parker is coming in at 3rd. Then of JPK and Dan Hanbury, I'm actually going to put JPK at number 2. Partly because, well, age doesn't have much to do with it as in him declining, but more so the fact that I can see Hanbury improving. I don't see JPK necessarily dropping off, but the fact that Hanbury is in the prime of his career, heading into the peak of his powers, I really think that he could absolutely explode this season and push close to 120. Josh Kennedy could certainly do not similar. I think he's probably more your 110 to 115 guy, which is fantastic, but you know what you're going to get with him. As his breakdown showed, only went under 90 once. He won't give you as many big games as in 150s, but he'll give you plenty in the 115 to 130, which is fantastic. Hanbury, I just think, if he really does have a great season, I think he could be that really explosive type of player, and I think a guy that could really, poll a lot of Brownlow votes. I wouldn't put it past him to win a Brownlow in his time. So I'm putting Hanbury down at number 1, and currently he is he's definitely in my team at the moment. I think I'm a big fan of Dan Hanbury, have been for a long time. I like his ratio of inside and outside ball winning ability. I think he could probably even kick a few more goals next season. That sort of didn't drop off, but I just think he has the ability to certainly kick a few more the way he plays. So I think, obviously that knee injury in the grand final, any doubt about his body was put to rest after the time trial when they returned to training last year now. Absolutely dominated. I think it was a 3K time trial. He was beyond many of his teammates and well clear of second and a lot of them, really. He dominated that for sure. So he could be primed for an absolutely massive season, but I definitely think if you pick any of those 3 guys, you're probably going to end the season pretty pleased with how you've ended up. But as we know, if you can get 5 points extra per game on your premiums and say your opponent, then at the end of the season that's going to be quite a few ranking points. So those 3 guys certainly took up a fair bit of time talking about them, but I definitely reckon that they provoke a fair bit of discussion. It's always interesting when one team has so many guns, who's going to score the most points, who could rise ever so slightly above the other. But one guy that will join those fellas is Isaac Heaney, and I'm a massive fan of him as well. I think he's probably in the top 5 players that you pick first for your SuperCoach side. He's a forward, and he's at 433k, and to be honest, I think he's an absolute lock. Now, he's 21 years old, 38 games. You'd probably like him to maybe have another season under his belt before he really explodes. It's always nice to see a guy having played around your 60 to 70 games and then he really explodes. But I think Heaney, he could be another kettle of fish. He's sort of in your Cripps and Bont mould where they're capable of dominating the AFL landscape before normal blueprint would allow. So I think the opportunity is there, the fact that Tom Mitchell has left, and I think certainly Sydney and John Longmire will look to inject a bit more youth with the likes of Kieran Jack and McVeigh perhaps taking a backward step as far as their significant role in the midfield. Now his numbers, 79.6 average last year, only the 81.8 time on ground, that's a percentage there, so there's probably a good 6 to 7% that he could go up to reach his fellow midfielders. So that just shows, he's got more time to go in the midfield, and he's a fantastic player on the rise. I mean, he's long been touted as a guy that could tear the competition apart. He's a fantastic mark, can kick a goal, and I think while I've thrown a lot of numbers at you so far, you just got to look at this guy play. And I saw him firsthand against the Cats in that final, and he was absolutely superb. He just had that sort of, I guess, way about him, and just the way he conducted himself on the big stage, and a presence. That's the word I'm looking for. He looked like he belonged. He wasn't scared of the big stage. Just such a compact and nice looking player, you know, very, very good over his head, clean, knows how to kick a goal, just tends to do the things that you want him to do at the right time. Now, not all players can do that, and not many can do that at just 21 years of age. So certainly Heaney seems just destined for stardom. Now, you'll pay $433,000 for him, and I could definitely see him bumping that average of 80 up to about 95. Now, of course, he played a fair bit more forward last year, particularly in the first half of the season. Did start to work his way in a bit more midfield minutes later in the year, and certainly against the Cats he seemed to play quite a fair bit of midfield. So I definitely think the fact that Tom Mitchell has left, there's the obvious spot, as well as a few older heads might take a bit of a backward seat or backward step, and definitely Heaney is right there at the top of the list for guys to come in and really make an impact in the Swans midfield. I think he could become a goal-kicking midfielder, you know, your Jimmy Bartel style, you know, very dangerous in the air, a good user. He's not the quickest bloke in the world, but not that I've thought about it greatly, but I come to think of it, Bartel is probably a reasonable comparison, and we know what he's capable of and what he's done through his career. So I think Heaney, to snap him up in the forward line, we could look back as Heaney dominates and dominates for years to come, and we weigh up our options. Do we pick Heaney in the midfield? We could look back at this season and go, how good was it to get Heaney as a forward? I don't think you want to miss this boat. I definitely think, you know, it's a little mid-price-ish, I know, but I reckon you want to be on this one. I am definitely putting it forward that you should be selecting Heaney. I'm a big fan of him. Something crazy would have to happen for him to exit a lot of sides through the pre-season, but I'll be having a fair bit of faith that he'll have a fantastic season in 2017. So moving on to a more senior man and a totally different type of player. We've talked a few midfielders, but we'll move on to a key forward. You may have heard of the lad, Lance Franklin. Certainly one of the biggest names in the game, and has been a SuperCoach star for many years. But I'm actually going to be predicting that Lance Franklin, no longer fantasy relevant. Some people may have thought that a year ago. You know, I might not be breaking news there, but I just think every time we look at our sides and select teams, Franklin is always one that comes up and goes, is he the exception to the rule of the key forward? And for many years he has been. Certainly 2008 to 2012 he absolutely was. 107, 87.9, you know, dropped back, but then 110.8, 115.5. They're big numbers, fantastic numbers. We know what he does. He's a match winner, kicks goals, big moment player, capable at his peak of working up the ground as well and finding a fair bit of the ball, and is pretty good tackle for his size. I mean, he's so agile and such a tough matchup. But big buddy, he hits the age 30 as the start of next season. That's always a little bit concerning, but certainly I'm not writing him off simply because of his age. I just think that the last few years have created a bit of a pattern that probably we've got to rule him out. Now, he's always been a bit of a roller coaster ride as a SuperCoach player, not only within the season, but from season to season. We've seen him go from 107 down to 88. We've seen him go from 99.9 to 87 from year to year. Now, 2013 to 2016, averages of 90.4, 99.9, 87.1 and 94.6. So he hasn't averaged three figures for 4 years. Now, I guess we could say that 99.9 is close enough, but nonetheless, he probably isn't having a great compelling case for us to pick him. Now, he had a good season last year, 81 goals, good numbers possession wise, it was over 17. You know, why didn't he average 100? I mean, I'm not too sure statistically, because I've worked through the stats and there isn't any real key indicator to suggest why. It obviously is just moments within games where he has been poorer, or someone else has stood up and taken those real match winning, you know, points when the game's really on the line. Nothing on a pure stats basis, because he had a pretty good season. But I just think Lance, you know, you got to pay $514,000 for him. He is a roller coaster. We've got a stack of great options in the forward line, like your Isaac Heaney, and I just think the time has gone where maybe we won't ever see that unbelievable season where he averages 110 again. I think that could be gone. The numbers back it up. The last few years, my thought process around Franklin has been maybe this is a year where he really finds it again. You know, maybe this is where he really goes bang and returns to some of his very best. But I think now a combination of age and a combination of just runs on the board, you know, it's 4 seasons of averages from 87 to 99. That's not exactly what we want. And I think another combination of the fact we've got Dalhouse, we've got McRae, we've got Heaney, we've got a lot of options in there, not to mention your Ewalts, your Lynches, you know, other guys are certainly in the mix for our forward lines, even though we've lost a few mid forwards. I think Franklin is probably just too risky, you know, highlighted by his 34 points against North Melbourne in round 22. He can kill you. I mean, in years gone by, he certainly rewarded the frustration. You know, one week you're tearing your hair out about Franklin because he's delivered you 40 points. The next he's delivered you 170. I'm not too sure we'll see as much as the top end now, and I think that too could be something that is worth considering, that he'll still have the odd poor game, but his absolute match-winning, enormous ceiling may have just dropped ever so slightly. He'll still have his games where he goes bang, but maybe now they're not enough to exchange and work out to a nice 3-figure average. It's always been a bit of a trade-off. Well, you get the good with the bad with Franklin. Maybe now, and maybe the last few years, we've had a little bit too much of the bad, not enough of the good. And that's purely being a harsh critic as a SuperCoach fan. He's had a tremendous few seasons, albeit with the odd hurdle or two, which he's come back from very well. He's had fantastic football seasons, but such is the nature of key forwards, they're very hard to put your finger on when it's worth taking the risk. And for mine, I think Franklin has probably done his dash in regards to being fantasy relevant. It's a big call. He's been great for many years. Certainly had some fantastic seasons for our SuperCoach sides. But for mine, I'm saying don't get sucked in by the Lance Franklin name. I think there's better options out there. Finally, it's been a fairly lengthy Sydney Swans podcast, but hopefully you've stuck around. Callum Mills, 420k. Obviously his debut season was as good as any. 22 games, 18.6 touches, 77.2 SuperCoach points. Very impressive, solid season, and beyond all that, he looked poised and he looked comfortable at AFL level, which is very hard to do for any player, let alone walking into a side that made the grand final. And he did, despite injury, he did end up playing the grand final, and he just looked extremely poised, was a very good intercept player, so playing that +1 at times off the half-back line, and found a nice little role at the Swans. Some are predicting he might get a bit more midfield time, which is certainly possible. And a lot of players, a lot of SuperCoach people are talking about him as an option in our back line. I'm a little more hesitant. I think you're probably better off selecting one of the 3 I discussed earlier and Isaac Heaney. I know that Mills in the back line, you know, he's a tempting option, but for me, I'm probably going to steer clear. I can definitely see why you would go with him, and I'll highlight the back end of his home and away season last year as a real example. You know, he had steady games working into the season, the first half of his season. You know, you're getting used to the AFL standard, but from rounds 13 to 22, averaged 87.6, and his range was 74 to 104. Just real consistency, which is very rarely seen from such a young player in a side that has so many commanding players in it. So he certainly found his feet at AFL level, no dramas. So I guess if you take that 87.6, you know, that's not going to be picking him on that number, but a lot of people will be going, you know, that's what he delivered in the back half of last year. Natural improvement. He's a talented player, further opportunity. He can press that to 93, 94, and he's at a nice price. I probably can't argue that, to be honest. That's a pretty good line of thinking, and I could see why people will do that. But I just feel, you know, 420k, it's really on the more expensive side of mid-price player, and you're probably wanting to be somewhat of a keeper and really press it to 95. And also the fact, I just think there's probably other guys who are still slightly ahead of him at the pecking order for Sydney, and the fact that he is a second-year player. As good as Mills is, the second-year blues do exist. It doesn't affect everyone, but it's always something that can come along. So just watch his pre-season, see how he's tracking along. I definitely could see him averaging around 90 this year and upping it fairly well from his 77, but I just think it's probably too risky to put that amount of coin into a guy who does have a lot of question marks. And you know, when I raise these questions, it's not always that I am absolutely destroying this bloke's relevancy in SuperCoach, or even that I believe it, but certainly it's worth putting to the I guess the radar of people's minds and discussing it, because when questions arise, you can go, shorty, there's your question, here's my answer, I'm still picking him. That's no dramas at all. But certainly it's worth discussing when a bloke does have quite a few question marks and his price tag's over 400,000. You want to be really sure on players when you start playing a very good coin, so bear that in mind. But I reckon that's about a wrap up of the Sydney Swans. Certainly talked quite a bit there, but we got through it nicely, so hopefully I've helped you out with a few selections there, because I think there's definitely quite a few guys that could really be of great benefit to your SuperCoach side in 2017. We've only got a couple more clubs now to go, which is great. These profiles of each club have been pretty well received, which is great to see. And get along to SuperCoach HQ and check it out there as well. I'm sure they'll have a few articles coming up soon, and if not, there's certainly some big bash stuff going on at the moment. If you're a cricket lover like we all are when we love our sport and get around the tennis at the moment, no fantasy for that, but I've done a podcast now. I think I'll just roll in and watch Djokovic. I think looking forward to that. So definitely give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe as always. Comment as always. It's great to hear from you guys, and I'll chat to you soon.